Welcome to our lecture on the Introduction to the Skeletal System, where we will focus on the general anatomy of bones and joints. To give you an overview of our session, here is our outline. We will cover the introduction, the functions of bone, the histology of bone, the classification of bones, the growth and development of bones, followed by cartilages, and finally, arthrology. Let's begin with our introduction to the skeletal system. The word skeleton literally means dried up body. In anatomy, each individual bone is considered an organ, and the term skeleton is applied to a structure that provides a supportive framework. This framework can be considered in different systemic approaches. First, we have the musculoskeletal system, where the muscular and skeletal systems are studied together. Second, there is the locomotor system, where bones, joints, and muscles are studied together. However, in its commonest usage, the term refers specifically to the bony skeleton that includes bones, cartilages, and ligaments. Now, let us define bones. Bone is a highly specialized, hard form of connective tissue that makes up most of the skeleton. As mentioned, the bones of the skeleton are organs because they contain several different tissues. Ultimately, it serves as the chief supporting tissue of the body. Moving on, let's look at the primary functions of bone. These include support and protection, movement, blood cell formation, and the storage of minerals and fat. Furthermore, bones serve as an attachment for muscles. Next, we examine bone, or osseous, tissue. Bone is a special form of connective tissue that consists of widely separated cells surrounded by large amounts of extracellular matrix. It features both organic and inorganic components. Regarding its chemical composition, healthy bone is half as strong as steel in resisting compression and equally strong in resisting tension. Looking closer at its makeup, bone is composed of 35% organic components, which include cells, fibers, and ground substance. This organic substance, particularly collagen, contributes the flexibility and tensile strength that allow bone to resist stretching and twisting. Conversely, the remaining 65% consists of inorganic components, composed of minerals, mostly calcium phosphate and calcium carbonate, which provide the bone's hardness. It is important to note that bone is not completely solid, since it has small spaces for vessels and bone marrow. Specifically, spongy bone has many such spaces, whereas compact bone has very few such spaces. Let us now look at the bone lining. The endosteum is the lining of the marrow cavity and the central canals of osteons. It is highly osteogenic, meaning it is bone-producing, and contains both bone-depositing cells and bone-destroying cells. On the exterior, the periosteum is a tough membrane covering the bone that is richly supplied by nerves and blood vessels. It is firmly secured to the underlying matrix by perforating fibers, also known as Sharpie's fibers. Structurally, it is divided into a fibrous layer made of dense, irregular connective tissue and an inner osteogenic layer made of bone cells. Next, let's break down the specific cells of bone. First, we have osteoprogenitor cells, which are flattened, undifferentiated cells located in the cellular layer of the periosteum and in the endosteum. These give rise to osteoblasts. Second, the osteoblasts are cuboidal to low columnar cells responsible for the synthesis of bone matrix. As they elaborate this bone matrix, they become surrounded by it, and then transition into osteocytes. Note that the bone matrix is calcified due to the seeding of the matrix via matrix vesicles derived from these osteoblasts. Continuing with our bone cells, osteocytes are flattened, discoid cells located in lacunae, and they are responsible for the maintenance of bone. Their cytoplasmic processes contact and form gap junctions with the processes of other osteocytes within tiny canals, called canaliculi. On the other hand, osteoclasts are multinucleated cells derived from monocytes, and they are responsible for the resorption of bone. The cooperation between osteoclasts and osteoblasts is responsible not only for the formation, remodeling, and repair of bone, but also for the long-term maintenance of calcium and phosphate homeostasis of the body. These osteoclasts typically sit in a depression of the bone matrix known as a Howship lacuna. Let's look closely at this cellular diagram to trace how these bone cells develop and work together. On one side, you can see the flattened, undifferentiated osteoprogenitor stem cells. Follow their development into the plumper, cuboidal osteoblasts, which are actively lining up to secrete the organic bone matrix. Notice how an osteoblast becomes entirely surrounded by its own matrix, transitioning into a mature, multi-branched osteocyte resting inside its tiny lacuna chamber. Finally, look at the completely distinct, massive, multinucleated osteoclast. You can see it resting in a specialized depression called a Howship lacuna, where it uses its ruffled border to break down and resorb bone matrix for remodeling and calcium homeostasis. Based on gross observation, bone features two different structures, compact and spongy. Compact bone is the dense outer layer that looks smooth and solid to the naked eye. This outer layer provides strength and looks like a solid, hard layer of bone. Consequently, it makes up the shaft of long bones and the external layer of all bones, allowing it to resist stresses produced by weight and movement. In contrast, spongy or cancellous bone consists of trabeculae, which form a honeycomb of small needle-like structures containing marrow for blood cell production or fat storage. It forms most of the structure of short, flat, and irregular bones, as well as the epiphyses of long bones. This spongy bone tissue is light, and it supports and protects the bone marrow. Let's look at the microscopic structure of bone. Compact bone is arranged in units called osteons, or Haversian systems. This structure is a group of concentric tubes that in cross-section appear as rings. They are made up of lamellae, which are layers of bone matrix with collagen running in one direction. Furthermore, osteons contain blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, nerves, and osteocytes, along with the calcified matrix. To detail this further, the circular lamella is called concentric or circumferential, whereas the interstitial lamella is an incomplete lamella found between the osteons. Within the lamella is a network of osteocytes embedded in lacunae and connected by canaliculi, or little canals. These cells are maintained alive by nutrients and oxygen, provided by blood vessels passing through the center of the osteon, called the central or Haversian canal, as well as the Volkmann's canal, which runs transverse to the diaphysis. Let's examine this first microscopic diagram of compact bone to orient ourselves with its structural layout. Notice how the bone is organized into these large structural cylinders called osteons, or Haversian systems, which resemble the concentric rings of a tree trunk. Each individual ring layer you see here is a lamella. Pay attention to the orientation lines on the diagram. They indicate that the collagen fibers within a single lamella run in a highly uniform direction, which allows the osteon to resist immense mechanical forces and twisting stresses. Zooming in further on this next histological diagram, let's look at how the cells are arranged within those matrix rings. You can see the dark, flattened osteocytes trapped inside their tiny almond-shaped spaces, which are labeled as lacunae. Notice the intricate spiderweb-like network of microscopic lines radiating outward from the lacunae. These are the canaliculi. This illustration beautifully demonstrates how the long cytoplasmic processes of neighboring osteocytes extend through these tiny canals to physically touch and form gap junctions, allowing them to pass nutrients along to one another. In this third microscopic diagram, we can trace the vital neurovascular plumbing of compact bone. Look right down the center of each round osteon to find the vertical opening. This is the central, or Haversian canal, which carries blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerves. Now look horizontally across the diagram to see the transverse channels cutting perpendicularly through the bone layers. These are Volkmann's canals. This diagram highlights how Volkmann's canals connect the external blood supply to the central canals, ensuring that oxygen and nutrients reach every single live osteocyte embedded in the matrix. Now let's transition to the classification of the human skeleton according to location. The 206 named bones of the skeleton are grouped into the axial and appendicular skeletons. The axial skeleton is located around the longitudinal axis of the body and is composed of 80 bones. These are constituted by the skull, with 8 cranial and 14 facial bones, 1 hyoid bone, 6 auditory ossicles, 26 bones of the vertebral column, and the thorax, which contains 1 sternum and 24 ribs. Meanwhile, the appendicular skeleton is composed of bones found in the limbs and their corresponding girdles, forming a total of 126 bones. Let's study this full-body anatomical diagram, focusing first on the shaded central core, which represents the axial skeleton. Follow it from the top down. It starts at the skull, which protects the brain with 8 cranial bones and shapes the face with 14 facial bones. Tucked into the neck region is the single hyoid bone, and inside the ears are the 6 tiny auditory ossicles. Moving down the midline, observe the 26 heavy bones of the vertebral column stacking together to form the spine. Finally, look at the protective chest cage or thorax, made up of the central flat sternum and the 12 pairs of ribs, totaling 24 ribs, all combining to protect our vital internal organs. Now, let's shift our gaze to the unshaded portions of this skeleton diagram, which map out the appendicular skeleton. Notice how these bones branch off from the main central axis to form our limbs and the structural frameworks that attach them. Look at the upper region to see the shoulder or pectoral girdles, including the clavicle and scapula, which anchor the long bones of the arms, hands, and fingers. Moving downward, look at the heavy pelvic girdle or hip bones, which securely lock the bones of the legs, ankles, and feet into the frame. This diagram clearly shows how these 126 bones are specifically arranged to provide us with locomotion and a wide range of movement. We can also classify bones according to their shape. First, long bones are longer than they are wide, presenting a slender shape. This category includes the bones of the arms, legs, hands, and feet, but excludes the wrists and ankles, and it also includes the clavicle. Second, short bones are box-like and cuboidal in shape, and they are found only in the ankle or tarsus and the wrist or carpus. Third, flat bones are thin, flattened, and usually somewhat curved. These usually serve protective functions, and examples include the ribs, shoulder blades, hip bones, cranial bones, and the sternum. Fourth, irregular bones have complex shapes, such as the vertebrae and facial bones. Fifth, sesamoid bones are small, flat, and sesame seed-shaped, with the patella being a prime example. Additionally, we have sutural bones, also known as wormian bones, which are small, flat, irregularly shaped bones found between the flat bones of the skull. Finally, pneumatic bones contain air-filled cavities lined with mucous membrane, such as the maxilla, ethmoid, frontal, and sphenoidal bones.